What happens when two dudes, one a retired Navy SEAL commander in Colorado Springs, and the other a hippie meditation teacher in New York City, get together to discuss living mindfully? That's a great question, because we don't know what will happen either. Raw, uncut, and unapologetic. Welcome to Men Talking Mindfulness with co-hosts John McCaskill and Will Schneider. Each week, we take an authentic dive into how mindfulness continually impacts our lives, deepens our relationships, and allows us to be emotionally alive. We filter all of our conversations through the man box, where we unpack how as men we are expected to act in society, how fighting the authentic human experience is exhausting and damaging, and how mindfulness can help. So happy you're tuning in to Men Talking Mindfulness. Now, on to the show.
Setting
live,
up,
brother.
Are we live? Hey, hello, everybody. Welcome to Men Talking Mindfulness. John McCaskill and our special guest, Liz Plank, who we've been waiting to have on the show for since we started season 2. So thank you for being here, Liz. Welcome. I'm just going to give a little intro about you, Liz, and all the wonderful things you're doing in the world. So Liz Plank, everybody, let's welcome her. Liz is an award-winning journalist, author, and the executive producer and host of several critically acclaimed digital series at Vox Media and NBC News. She's the CEO of Liz Plank Productions and is a columnist for MSNBC and has been listed as Forbes 30 Under 30, Mediate's most influential in news media, and Marie Claire's most powerful women, and was named one of the world's most influential people in gender policy by Apolitical. She's built a loyal following on numerous social platforms. She's also my friend that I met here in New York like a few years ago. And even I remember your book had just came out, Liz, and we have like a cool picture together of you in the book. You signed my book, which is so great. And look what it's led us. Like, it's creating more mindfulness for more men. And here's my co-host, John. Thanks for being here as well. And thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me. I still remember just feeling this pull towards you, just in the way that you taught and the things that you talked about and just your whole demeanor, where I was like, this guy's got it. Like, this guy's got the thing that I'm trying to build more awareness around and spread. And so I love that I had a little feeling about it, and it turned out to be right, because we are doing really incredible work, and you're helping so many people, particularly men who don't often know where to go and have places to go to talk about this kind of stuff. So I'm really appreciative.
Yeah. Thanks, Liz. John, anything you want to say to Liz? Or
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And Liz, you're spot on. I had that same feeling when I first got introduced to Will, probably, I don't know, a year and a half, 2 years ago. And we've never actually met in person. We just connected virtually, which I think is more common in this day and age, meeting people virtually. Anyhow, like Will has mentioned you numerous times on conversations and on some of our shows. And then he sent me your book two or 3 months ago, and just been tearing through it. Introduced it to my wife. She's starting to read it. And it's just so densely packed with phenomenal information and looking at things from a different perspective than me. I don't know if you know any of my background, but I come from the Navy SEAL teams and just retired from the Navy last year, which is a very hyper masculine community, which, I mean, I love that community, don't get me wrong, but there's definitely some things that I am learning coming from that community as a formerly hyper masculine man. I feel that I'm still masculine, but I've definitely tapped into my feminine side, not my weaker side, my feminine side. And this book has just helped me unpack that. And I'm a father of 2. I've got a little boy and a little girl, and then another little girl on the way. And I think reading through your book and learning about all this has also just changed how I am and how I'm going to be with both my little boy and my little girls. So thank you for writing this very important book, and thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you. Wow, that's incredible. I want to know more about your journey because it's the Navy SEALs. It is a really interesting space, and what you're saying is, I used to be hyper masculine. Now I'm tapping into my feminine, but it also seems like you are defining your own masculine for yourself. And
Yes,
that,
thank
you
you.
know, right? Like, and a lot of this conversation, you know, Justin Baldoni is coming out with a book about masculinity as well this year. And we're collaborating on a podcast, and something that he,
Nice.
you know, constantly talks about is like, it's not about redefining masculinity. It's about undefining masculinity.
Yeah.
And it's about figuring out what it means to you. Right. And in
Right.
so many conversations, people will be like, what is masculinity? And I'm like, don't ask me. Like, you know, it means something to me as a woman and as a person who is engaged with and been in very masculine spaces and engaged with men, but it should mean something different to every single person in the way that femininity means something different to every single woman.
Sure.
So I love that. And I know that must be a pretty, like a harder journey, right? It's like the Beauty and the Beast, like the dark path or the sunny path. And like, it looks like it's the dark path, but it's actually, you know, the sunnier path is the one that can be more challenging, but that will lead to more, I'm sure, more happiness for you. And
Yeah,
as you,
fulfilling,
discover
much more fulfilling.
what it means to you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think that kind of leads into, how we normally do this is we start with a grounding practice. And then we also talk about mindful moments of the week, which we probably need to do a grounded practice. So you talked about a little bit of chaos prior to joining the episode today. Will and I, if you look at Will's name tag on the Zoom, it says Jon McCaskill. We are both logged in under my account because today has been a one snafu after another. I walked into the co-working space that I broadcast from, and I realized that I'd forgotten my computer. And Will has jumped through so many hoops since then to make this work, because we definitely wanted to have this live so that we can get some engagement from our viewers. So we're both Jon McCaskill for the day. But like I said, we normally kick it off with a short grounding practice. And it's just 1 or 2 minutes. If you're game, we'd love to have you join us. All right.
I love that.
Will, how you want to do it? You want to lead the opening one, and I'll do the closing?
How about you jump in, John? You seem to be on a roll, so go for it. I'll close this out. Yeah.
Right on. All right. Well, go ahead and assume a comfortable position, whatever that looks like for you. And if you feel comfortable doing so, go ahead and close your eyes. If you're not feeling comfortable closing your eyes, just soften your focus. Then bring your attention to your breath, and we're just going to do some simple box breathing. That'll be breathing in for 4 seconds, holding for 4, breathing out for 4 seconds, holding for 4, and then doing that cycle again. And we'll do that 4 times. And pay very close attention to the physical sensation of the box breathing. So go ahead and start by breathing out all your air. Breathe in, hold, breathe out, 1, 2, 3, 4, hold for 4, in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, 2, 3, 4, hold for 4, in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, 3, 2, 1, hold for 4. And last one, in for 4, hold for 4, and out for 4, 3, 2, 1, hold. And then breathe naturally. And slowly, when you're ready, come out of this simple practice and note where you are compared to where you started just 4 breaths ago. That's that. Keeping it simple for this one. We definitely want to delve into the book and everything that Liz has to share with us today. So we kept it short and simple. going to cut out the mindful moments for this particular episode as well.
No problem.
So, all right. Well, let's jump into it. Liz, I'll jump in. Will, if you're good with the first question.
Oh, me? Or you want to
Yeah,
go?
I'll jump in with it.
Yeah, go for it, John, please.
All right. So my first question to you, Liz, is as an overt feminist, when I shared this with my sister-in-law, who is also an overt feminist out there, and she was like, well, this is interesting. Like I shared the title of the book. She's like, why would I want to read about men? I was like, well, look who it's written by and see if you want to read it. And now she's reading it. As an overt feminist, what made you want to write a book entitled For the Love of Men, all about toxic masculinity? She was like, well, this is interesting.
Great question. I actually became very annoyed with the lack of progress. Like just in gender equality and feminist spaces, to be completely honest. I mean, I loved the safety of those spaces. I, have a master's degree in gender. I studied women's studies for my bachelor's. Like I came from a feminist household, and my mother really got robbed from me because of sexual violence and because of gender-based violence when I was young. So I just had a very sort of clear understanding of gender inequality, and that like this was a problem we needed to solve. What became clear to me as I was, going through the world as a journalist and reporting and writing about these issues, particularly during the Me Too movement, it became very clear to me because I would go on cable news, I would go on MSNBC, several times a week, and I'd be talking about, the latest perpetrator or the latest story or the latest, right? And this, during the Trump presidency, of course, as well. And I was on the campaign trail for that. So I was covering, just overt misogyny. And it was so undeniable to me. But I became very frustrated by how these conversations were only had amongst women. And even when I was invited, on a panel, it was women trying, being asked, why is this happening? And I remember just being like, maybe you can invite some guys, because I don't think we did this, this is not, women did not create violence against themselves. Women are not responsible for violence that is perpetrated against them. And even the violence against men in our culture, which is very present, and gender-based violence as well, because men have a gender as well, is still mostly perpetrated by men. Of course, there are women who are perpetrators of domestic violence. There are women who are perpetrators of sexual violence, but the numbers are pretty staggering. Even when it comes to male victims, 90% of the perpetrators are men. And so there's a really unique opportunity for us to ask why. And when I would ask why, I would often be confronted with the same answer, which was just like, well, that's just how men are. Men are just dumber. And men would tell me this, by the way. After I did Morning Joe, when my hardcover came out, one of the men on the panel, very prominent, but do you really think boys and men are better than this? Men are just dumber than women. Men are just more violent than women. Men are just more aggressive than women. Men are just like this, right? And I was like, how offensive would it be? I mean, it is offensive. People say this all the time, and it used to be more acceptable to say this about women, right? Women are just more sweet, women are just women are just more delicate. If someone said that to you, right, in the workplace, women can't lead, which was really something that people used to really say. I mean, Sheryl Sandberg's book, with all the criticism that there is around it, was also a catalyst to a conversation about women in the workplace, and saying, leaders can look like all kinds of different things. But for the longest time, I mean, one of my first articles when I became a journalist was criticizing this New York Times Room for Debate section, which was literally called "Can Women Lead?" Like that was the headline. And I wrote a piece on this like blog no one had ever heard about, and the New York Times responded to it and they changed the headline. And that was one of the first moments in my life really where I was like, okay, writing can be this, superpower. And the internet can be this superpower to have really important conversations. So when I started thinking about my first book, although I think the impulse and I think people's expectations were that I was going to write about women, I actually was like, I want to write about men because I want this to get done. Like, I'm not just here to like, virtue signaling or just like being part of the movement. Like, I want change, and change is impossible if everyone is not at the table. And so I wanted, to do call-in feminism instead of call-out feminism. I wanted to, for me, feminism was this block party. It wasn't a speakeasy. It's okay if you don't know all of the right words and know all of the right, like whatever is right. And particularly for men, it's okay that you've made mistakes. And actually, what women really want is for you to admit to those mistakes. I think that this happens with white people in anti-racism work as well, right? Many white people believe that they're the good white liberal, right? I'm not, doing what the KKK, I'm not like, this racist that we see on TV, that we see on, I'm different. And actually what I've learned, especially this year, is that the best thing I can do as an anti-racist person in the world is to admit that I am racist, is to admit that I grew up in a racist society, and therefore I've internalized these things too. And proving how good I am and proving that I'm not is actually really not helpful. So I encourage men, I understand the fear of saying I've done, I've taken part in the system, because we are holding a lot of men accountable very publicly right now. But I think that the more men do it, the more acceptable it will be. And I think the better these conversations are going to be, because they're going to be real. They're going to be authentic, right? Like if you're not talking about truth and you're not operating within truth and vulnerability and authenticity, like why are we having a conversation,
And that's what we experienced some of that, Liz, on like last week when we breaking down your chapter 10. Like, I mean, the unbelievable amount of uncomfortableness I was experiencing, and John, as we worked through this vulnerably, authentically, trying to really understand on, I mean, John is an ex-SEAL. I was a hyper-competitive athlete growing up, so really imbued with these, very, and I really want to get into this whole toxic masculinity. People are blowing up our live feed right now. Like, really, let's talk about what toxic masculinity is. But feeling like, I definitely, there's been times, and I hate to admit it, even my feelings about my mom growing up is like, she's less than, in some ways she's not, and it's hard for me to admit that now. I mean, very hard, because I mean, I love you, Liz. I love my mom, like I love women. And I feel you're going to be the ones that are going to rescue us, or you already are in some ways, from where we've been in the hyper masculine. But I just want to really admit, like, this has been uncomfortable for us on Men Talking Mindfulness. And it's been a lot of the comments that we're receiving from men and women. It's like, I feel a lot of it comes from that uncomfortable place, or that we talked about, like that kind of hyper masculine armor that like presents itself to be like, no, that's not the way things are. So
can I ask what parts were like, I'm very curious, like reading, that chapter, like what parts were like, oh, like this is a little hard for me to read?
Can I jump in, Will?
Yeah, man, absolutely.
So specifically the chapter 10, man session, I mean, there were a lot of uncomfortable parts. But what really jumped out at me was man session, and we spoke about this on Friday, was what we are doing to both our little boys and our little girls in something as simple as having separate aisles in the toy store. And I was like, what? That's not that big a deal. And then I literally took my son to Walmart and I walked up and down the toy aisles, and I like walked down the little girls aisle, right? And what was there? Everything is pink. Everything is princesses. Everything is taking care of babies. Everything
Nurturing,
is showing, nurturing, exactly. Showing empathy and compassion. And you just go right around the corner to the boys aisle, and there's guns and GI Joes and monsters and Transformers, and everything that is the antithesis of compassion. It is destruction. It is anger. And that showed me, what am I doing to both my little girl and my little boy? And then literally that night, and I sent a text of this to Will. I almost called you John there for a second. I looked over at your name.
Should I change mine to John too? Just so we're all.
Oh, now I don't exist. Thanks, guys. That's really nice. It's really nice. I'm just kidding.
So literally that night, I sent a message because my wife had taken my daughter to a girls' trip, and it was me and my son just hanging out at the house for a few days. And my son went and grabbed one of the princess dresses that is in my little girl's playroom, grabbed it, and he walked up and he's like, Anna, from the Frozen series, right? Frozen, with Anna and Elsa. And he wanted to wear this little dress. And there was a part of me that was like, do I want to put my son in a princess dress? And then I thought, John, you're reading this book about toxic masculinity. You're learning all this, and there's still a level of you that's uncomfortable doing it. But I let him do it, and he loved it. He ran around in a dress, hey, whatever. He's 2 years old, not even. He turns 2 next week. And what am I teaching him by saying, hey, you can't do that, or by saying phrases like, hey, that's just for girls, or you throw like a girl. Will and I talked about, was it Tony's TEDx speech, where if you tell a son that he's throwing like a girl, what are you saying about the feminine side, right? What are we saying? So that made me uncomfortable, but I'm glad that I worked through it, and I know that is going to come up in my life over and over as my son and my little girl and my next little girl get older. What do I teach them about I don't even want to say the other gender, because you talked about, gender is not binary. There's the spectrum. And that was a thing that was like, wait, what? And my head like exploded when I read that.
I know.
It's amazing.
It's the most, it's the biggest organizing principle in our society. So, and the, when you start reading about it, you start thinking like, I don't know, this is how like conspiracy theorists must feel like. They're like, wait, what? Like this whole world has been lying to me, right? Or it's just premised on, and not to say that gender doesn't matter. I love being a woman. I love, I love being with other women. I love my, my gender expression. But I think it's important for us to realize that it's a script, and, it's a script that we've all been given, and there's a teleprompter, and you can read it word for word and you'll get rewarded. Or we can deviate from those scripts and perhaps create different kinds of reward and punishment systems, that you basically, with your son of not punishing either gender for transgressing these social scripts, so that we ensure that people become who they are, free from, the pressure of fulfilling gender expectations or any other expectations, right? Like, it's, I think a lot about what my life would look like, and I will get emotional because I think about this a lot.
Go for it, Liz.
I think so much. You guys, you're bringing it out of me. Like, I think so much about what my life could have been, even like today, like what my life could be like if so much of if I had not been so programmed to believe that I have to be thin, or that I have to be beautiful to be valued and to be loved, that I have to be not too assertive, or else it will, I will lose, people will not like me, people will not hire me, people will reject me. I think so much about that. And I think about who I could be. And I think it's a really wonderful exercise for men to do too. You know, like, who could I be if I didn't have this armor, if I didn't have this pressure? And maybe like 90% of it is the same. Maybe, you know, I think there are a lot of men who are like, I love, like, I don't know, guns or whatever. And it's like, I want to be this guy, right? And that's like, you know, as long as you're not hurting anyone or yourself, like, great. But I think, yeah, it's a lot about, it's really a journey of self-discovery. It is a political conversation, but it's a mindful conversation. You know, that's why I'm so happy to, be here with you. But Will, we totally went on a tangent with your question. Sorry.
No, well, John had that first question. But like, what I think, I mean, you see this feed is just blowing up. Like, I mean, our live feed is just going really crazy with all sorts of comments about like, but like, I think maybe we'll turn to, because, you know, that whole concept of because it really irritates me, I got to say, in some ways, Liz, this whole idea and concept. When I say toxic masculinity, I feel like I'm like a bad person, or like I'm like a virus that's going to infect everybody else around me. You know, like we're kind of living in. And you know, and I appreciate my own resistance to that, but I also appreciate, you know, how you define toxic masculinity, because it's really, and it also hits home. Like, it really hits home when you use that word, the toxic with masculinity. So maybe you can just dive in a little bit by, you know, how that makes you feel, as well as like where it kind of comes from, and what, you know, we'll talk, I guess, some of the cures about it, but we maybe can jump in that regard.
Yeah. So 10 days before my final manuscript was due, I went through 336 pages or whatever, and I tried to remove the word toxic masculinity, the term toxic masculinity, from my book. To my editor's complete like freak. My editor was like, "I'm sorry, what are you doing?"
And well, because it's a point of contention, you know. It's like it sets up the drama, right? Yeah.
It has become so politicized. It has become a term that is so inflammatory, that I had many conversations. I had a conversation with David Hogg about it, actually, the Parkland survivor, who's this incredible gun safety advocate. And, you know, he was like, you know, he's sort of an expert at working on issue. You know, he's like, we have to use language that, I don't like to say the other side, but, you know, we have to use language that people who we need to convince will understand. And I think that toxic masculinity, unfortunately, has become, just branded in a really negative way. And I also think, you know, I have always approached my work tried to approach my work through a solution-based journalism framework. So solution-based journalism, as the term suggests, is about framing articles, framing reports, framing videos, whatever, right, in a way that is pointing to people who are coming up with solutions to the problem. The last thing I want to do, because I talk about hard stuff, I've chosen to talk about, you know, I could just like report on sweet little cats being saved from, you know, fire people or whatever, right? But I do choose to talk about difficult things, because I think that actually talking about difficult things is crucial to our well-being. But we need to do it in a way where people don't feel worse, where people don't feel deactivated and depressed and hopeless and helpless, and instead talk about things that are difficult with a solution-based framework. And so that's why I didn't even want the word toxic masculinity really in the book. It's hard to talk about a problem without naming it, though. So it does appear a few times. And obviously the men who use it, I didn't change, you know, I'm using their own words and would never want to change that. So that's where the term mindful masculinity came, where I was like, I can't figure out, and I made a list, I made a whole Google Doc. I mean, I'll share it with you, of like, what's another term? Is it fake masculinity? Is it archaic masculinity? Is it outdated masculinity, traditional masculinity? And I do kind of use all of those different terms interchangeably in the book, but I wanted us to focus on mindful masculinity, right? I wanted the framework of the book to be, this is a term that we can all agree is like a positive thing that we can sort of, just like all collectively think about. And mindful masculinity also suggests that it's just there's just a consciousness to the way that we approach gender. And what I described before about my own consciousness when it comes to, femininity and womanhood, that's what feminism is, right? It's a feminist consciousness. And that I want that for men. Like I want, and that's, why both of your work is so important, because that's what you're doing. You're not telling men how to be, you're not telling men what not to do. You're just inviting men to think about what they want and what they want to do, and just have some clarity with that. But so I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah, I think it's difficult. The best way for me to talk about it is that I just feel like it's our current definition of masculinity is just wrong. Like it is just like, no one knows who invented it. No, it's like who came up with this, and why are we all, sort of, it feels a bit like, cultish.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
Well, I think it's like, it's not even, I feel it with the right or with the wrong, but then there's a right way. I think it's just not helpful. It's just not helpful, to being to living your full potential. You talk about in the last chapter about being a mindful man. And it's like, I think one way, I'm thinking, John, that we can, and we've been doing this in the show, and Liz, you talk about this in that last chapter, instead of it being like getting in touch with our feminine side, it's like, how about elevating our emotional intelligence? Like it's not masculine or feminine to be compassionate or empathetic or nurturing. It's just being
in control,
right? It's being
of your emotions, right? Like, managing your emotions is actually really masculine. Like it's it's a commanding, masculine, again, whatever that means. It's a very commanding quality.
Yeah. Here's a little story. So I was talking about commanding your emotions. Like I was in Nigeria, and we're all like, I was with the host crew, with our team of teachers that were there. We're at this hotel, and there's this pool. It's an evening, and I get pushed in the pool. I have my camera on me, this and that. I get out of the pool, and I was like pissed, but I did not fight. I did not yell. And the amount of respect I got from everybody, was the Nigerian men, like the American men and the women, was astounding, because I didn't freak out and punch somebody in the face. Like seriously, I had my new camera on me. I was really pissed, but I was like, anyway, like that's just that self-control. It gains respect too. Like it gains a lot of respect when you have self-control, instead of like going to anger, or going to frustration, and taking out your lack of emotional control on other people, in a lot of ways.
And how did you learn to do that? Through?
I don't, what, it might've, I don't know. I think I was meditating and practicing more at that time a little bit. I think it was, really, Liz, it's like, my dad, definitely, and I love my dad. I love you, Dad, if you're listening to this podcast. He's a good man, but he is basically emotionally numb, my dad. Yeah. But my mother allowed me to cry, allowed me to have my emotional life, and I think that has helped me, to just be in touch with that, like, and be able to cry, and be able to cry in front of my two other brothers and my dad, and not be shut down. I think that just helped me to get in touch with those feelings, instead of those feelings being told to me like, boys don't cry, and what's the alternative to crying? Getting pissed off, anger, getting aggressive, breaking shit, it's like, so I think that's helped me just to get in touch with those feelings, and then just knowing like what, or understanding as I go through life, like what is good leadership. It's all about being inclusive and welcoming things, and talking about things, and dealing with things, instead
listening.
Listening. Exactly.
Yeah. Isn't that great? Like, You know, like who has a manager that was like, he listens too much. Like I feel too heard, right? Like it's just, it's the best, right?
Nobody
Like
ever
you want
said
to feel
ever.
heard by your manager,
right?
Ever.
But I want to jump in with you know, you mentioned the crying and how you felt about crying about something and how that ended up rather than crying, you ended up putting on this fake armor and got angry. And you mentioned in the book, Liz, that one thing that every masculine myth has in common is shame, and how that can cause a shame cycle. And it's almost like, okay, I get sad, I want to cry, that makes me feel ashamed, so I put up this armor, I get angry, then I get ashamed that I got angry, and it causes this shame spiral. Can you talk a little bit about that shame spiral and how one can potentially break out of it?
Thank you. And I was actually, as Will was speaking, I was thinking about that and the importance of how much unprocessed trauma I think exists in you know, a lot of people, but particularly in men and boys, because right, what you described with your son earlier in our conversation about the frozen dress, you know, you paused and reflected and, you know, acted on in that situation, I think in a really healthy, positive, open way. Most boys growing up in our culture, unfortunately, will not receive that response. They will receive the response of what's wrong with you, right? What's wrong with you is for people who experience, who want to sort of start to be in touch with some of the core shame that they might have. That is, if you, Brene Brown talks about this, she's like, what's the question in your head? And I know that seems like a weird, you're like, what's the question in my head? But just like, she's like, just think about what the question is in your head. What's the question that you kind of like ask yourself a lot? And when she said that, I was listening to her on a podcast or something, and I thought, what's wrong with you? That's my, you know, that's my own core shame stuff from, you know, my childhood and what happened with, you know, particularly with my mother, who was like very, very, very depressed and had PTSD. So I developed all of these coping mechanisms because of that trauma. And now these coping mechanisms are in my adult life a big impediment to my life, right? So I, even as a woman, right, like growing up in a society where my feelings, you know, no one told me, you know, girls don't cry. No one told me these things, but I still, you know, have some shame around my emotions. I started doing all of, you know, I developed all these maladaptive, you know, coping strategies, which I won't get into. But I think that for a lot of boys, if you've been told, what's wrong, why do you want to wear this dress? What? And that is your caretaker, your primary caretaker's reaction. You're not going to think, especially if you're 2 years old or really under the age of 5, which is where all of our connections are made. And they're very hard to, you know, change after that. If you've had trauma before that, it's impossible for a child to think, oh, there's nothing wrong with me. This is my parent. My parent is, you know, trying to protect me from society's punishment of, you know, boys transgressing gender roles. Oh, this is about my dad's own relationship with gender. Oh, this is about, right? Like children don't have that capacity. Children will go directly to, there's a problem with me. I am broken, right? There's something wrong with me. And that's just, that brings me so much sadness to think about all of the boys that in big and small ways get told these messages very, very, very early on. And again, develop all kinds of coping mechanisms, develop all kinds of, okay, armor, which is, you know, a very common one for men. And then later in life, experience difficult things like being pushed in the pool with your camera.
Yeah.
And it might have nothing to do with, you know, being told what's wrong with you because you want to wear a dress. But when it's, but we'll react with anger, with frustration, with rage, with hitting, right? We see it, we see a whole spectrum of violence, particularly when it comes to men, from hitting their partner to committing a school shooting, right? Like, I mean, we see every level. And so I think a lot about this phrase, which, you know, therapy is used a lot, which is like, if it's hysterical, it's historical. And I think it really needs to be something that we think about for men and boys, that when there are these rage episodes or these anger episodes, that men can fall into, you know, that it probably isn't about the thing, it's about the other thing. And when we do act in ways that feel overwhelming, that feel like I didn't want to do this, it's because there's childhood trauma. It's because there's like, it's triggering something, a way that you felt when you were young. So I really think a lot of this conversation is about inner child work, because we are traumatizing children.
Yeah.
We are traumatizing children, and we are traumatizing boys when we make them grow up in such a rigid set of rules, and that any deviation from that, we shame them for.
Well, I feel
they will internalize that.
It's the children, of course, but it's also the lack of a male role model that shows us sensitivity, that shows us another way of being, that shows us, you know, a way of soothing. It shows us a way of being like, hey, why don't we, you know, I think of me raising my son some days and my girls, it's like, hey, why don't we just stop and take a breath for a second? You know what I mean? Just take a breath and detach and then go forward, you know, and, you know, so it's that trauma, you know, I think that's part of this, the toxicity, you know, comes from, you know, I mean, I revered my father, you know, as a young man. I think like most, you know, that's our epitome of masculinity, of our first male role model is our father. And if that father, you know, is loaded up or with old ways of masculinity that have continually brought him into shame loops, that, you know, that keeps him away from having deeper relationships and, you know, even more success in life because of his lack of emotional intelligence and self-control with emotions. It's like, and then it's like, but what I feel as, you know, and reading your book, Liz, about like the pink shopping cart and the, you know, the men, you know, like crushing it. It's like, well, yeah, but I mean, that's teaching us. And I've seen it in my family. I've experienced it in myself. I'm sure you have, John, as well. It's like, you know, it's like, you don't do that. Like, you do not do that. And it's pervasive. It is just everywhere in my very German family, Italian family, and Irish family. It doesn't matter what, you know, ethnicity I bring up. Like, it used to be there. Even with the men when I'm hanging out in Nigeria, it's all about this bravado and this like, like kicking ass, you know, kind of attitude. But it's just run so deep, Liz, and to really dive into your book, it's so, you know, it creates a lot of awareness, but it's so deeply disturbing as well.
Yeah. You know? You realize it's everywhere, right? You're like, whoa, it's everywhere I look. And, you know, to your point, it happens in childhood in these like instances, but then it's repeated and confirmed over and over and over and over again. So it's very difficult on an individual level. You know, what you both are doing is incredibly difficult. It is, you know it.
We didn't know it was going to be like this, but it's challenging.
Right?
We've learned in the past few weeks how people are very either supportive or on the completely opposite side. Hey, they're like, what are you guys doing? This is against this, and this. And I was laughing a second ago because you said it's everywhere, and I'm working out of this co-working space, and I'm looking out of my car, and I drive a little Fiat, a yellow Fiat 500 with racing stripes. And
you drive that little car, John. Why can't you get a man's
exactly.
car, John? Like, what the hell?
I feel that I'm secure in my masculinity enough to
That's
where I can drive around that car. Yeah.
Yes, that's what I see. When I see the guy in the big freak, Mustang that like has to be loud, has to go fast, I'm like, sorry for your small, manhood. Like, just like, and I think we're starting to see that, right? Like, not to get political, but I think, we saw it with the difference in how masculinity is just expressed from Donald Trump to Joe Biden, is just pretty incredible. And we have a second gentleman, in Doug Elmhoff, who is Kamala Harris's husband, and him being excited about this role already got all this backlash. People, I can't think of something more emasculating, right? Like there was this tweet that went viral from this whatever, guy. And it's, I think about that so much where, and I talk about this in the book, of just how fragile masculinity, is, that it can be just taken away with a Twitter handle, with a support, being supportive to your wife, with wearing a mask, right? Like that we need, it's really unfair, I think, for men to have to wake up every morning and be like, okay, how do I prove that I'm a man? Because whatever I did yesterday doesn't count. That's exhausting.
Well, that leads me to another question, and it has to do with the mixed signals that men get in, hey, you should be a gentleman, you should open the door, you should pick, you cover this quite a bit in your book. You talk about how, in society, on a first date and many of the dates after that, it's kind of expected that the man is going to pay. And we get these signals that, you should be a gentleman, you should be manly, but at the same time, we also want, as men, we want women to be equal. So what side should we be kind of leaning towards? And you also talked about, I think you called it a chivalry cleanse that you went on.
Diet.
And you or chivalry diet.
Better.
How did you, first off, what the hell is that? I mean, I know what it is, but for our watchers and listeners, what is that? And then can you talk about the mixed signals that men are getting in society?
Thank you. Yeah, that's a great question. I went on a chivalry diet because as I was writing the book, I learned a lot about myself writing and interviewing men, right? In the way that I'm sure you learn a lot about yourself, even hopefully in this conversation with me, but talking to women, right? So I realized as I was writing this book, and I was like, hey, come on, guys, like, who cares who pays for the check? Why aren't, and I particularly was going on a lot of disappointing dates with the opposite sex. And one of my complaints, and that I would have with a lot of women, and hopefully this can be helpful to people listening, is just the importance of asking follow-up questions. It is, if you want to go on a good date, no matter what your gender is, like, just ask some good follow-ups. Because asking a question obviously is really wonderful, and being good at asking good questions is, a skill. But asking a follow-up question means that you actually listen to the answer and then you have another question, right? Like it just really, I think, reveals active listening, which everyone, again, wants to feel heard and seen, and will feel great no matter what the romantic connection is. And so I would go on these dates and in many instances would be disappointed by, guys just wouldn't, ask me that many questions. And I would be the one, sort of keeping the conversation going, and we'd learn so much about him, but then we wouldn't get to me until much later, and, or at all. But then but they knew that they needed to pay. They knew that they needed to pick the place. They knew that they needed to check in with my dietary restrictions and make sure that, they did everything else right. But the part that really, I think, mattered to me, and I know that there are a lot of women who think that paying for the check is very important to them. So I don't blame men for caring about those things, because that's what society tells them is really important. But I just kept thinking, why don't you focus on the, why do we have hard, fast and rules for men on dates when it comes to the transaction, but not when it comes to the emotions? And so, but then I realized, oh, wait a minute, I am saying this, I'm, here on my soapbox, and I'm still expecting men to pay on the first date. And if we split the check, I have been known to, complain about it afterwards to my friends. And so I, realized that there was,
damned if we don't.
Yeah, I know,
well,
right?
That's the thing. And so I got that, and I was like, I cannot participate in the system that I am, criticizing. And so I went on a chivalry diet, and I, was dating a person at the time, and he was very chivalrous and very sweet, but I really I was like, nope. Like, and I remember, like, we got this little Airbnb for the weekend, or he got it. And then halfway through the trip, when we got there, I just like Venmoed. I was like, oh, how much was it? And he was like, oh, whatever. And so I Venmoed him like half of it without asking, or without, mentioning it. And, it took like a full day for him to say anything about it. He was like, yeah, I noticed that you Venmoed me, like, thanks, appreciate it. You didn't have to do that, but like, and I also felt like it made our relationship better because money, man, like money, it runs everything, unfortunately. And money is power, and power dynamics in relationships can really can ruin a relationship if they're not, equal and talked about or acknowledged, right? And I was actually felt far more free once I was splitting equally. And I think that without, like, unconsciously, I would let him make decisions about, I don't know, whatever, while we were on this trip. And all of a sudden, I just felt more empowered to, just be equally, I don't know, present and in the relationship, and it made it better. So I actually realized, like, oh, this is actually harming not just men, but me. Like these, again, rules that who invented and why are we still doing it? Who knows? So yeah, it was actually a really enjoyable experience. And it was challenging for me, which I think is how a lot of this has to go, especially in couples. And as I love hearing that, couples reading the book, or heterosexual couples reading the book together, women reading it, men reading it, and having conversations about it, because we're all in the system. We're all wrapped up in it. And women reinforce these expectations too. And by the way, when men wouldn't pay on the first date, it wasn't just that I was like judgmental about them. I think that at the core of it, it made me feel bad about me, right? And it comes back to shame, where, well, if he's not paying for me, I'm not worthy, or I'm worthless, or right. Like it was actually internalized shame that I had created out of these, norms around masculinity and gender. So it all, they affect each other, and we affect each other.
I love how you talk about, and I want to make a comment, then I want to get into probably like one last question as we run into time. Well, I think it's like you really bring up a great point, Liz, as far as chivalry and how it sets up or can confront a power dynamic. If you allow him to pay, like, what would the rest of that weekend be, right? If he's always taking care of you, right? And he's kind of more in that power position. And maybe that's also chivalry in some ways. It's like, boom, like, I'm going to take care of my woman, and it's just like, and it's just like, and it puts women kind of in the back seat in some ways of the relationship, or it could be depending on the woman and the relationship. Don't get me wrong, but but that's really interesting. You bring up chivalry and power dynamics, and money is a big player when you talk about power. So wow, I thought this might be a great way to kind of take us home. Is Shelly here on our feed? She goes, how are men supposed to know their masculinity is toxic? And I think that can kind of lead us into the mindfulness masculinity. I thought that'd be kind of a good way.
How do they know their masculinity is toxic? Unhelpful? Yeah, I think a lot of this is, again, for me as a woman and coming into feminism, and it is a journey about self-discovery and discovering what's the gap between my attitude and my behaviors? What's the gap between like who I, my highest self and my actual self, or like the self that the behaviors that kind of guide my present self. And I think a really important exercise for this, actually, if people are into journaling and, writing things down, because I think it's always a really great way to get stuff, out of actually your subconscious and bring it to your conscious mind, is just free writing exercises, is making a list of your beliefs about yourself. And then after you make that list, writing how those beliefs help you or serve you, and which ones do not. And then I think that's already a really great way to start in terms of, sort of the Marie Kondo approach to masculinity, which I talk about in the book, which is, sort of the way that you would clean your apartment or clean out your closet. And you're like, all right, what's in here? Because all I see is like the stuff in the front, but I need to go and see what's in the back too. I need to take, a full inventory, right? Which we talk about in 12-step programs, like a full inventory of my behaviors. And which ones are serving me, which ones aren't serving me, which ones are hurting me, and which ones have hurt other people. And I think that making those amends is extremely powerful. It's extremely hard. But again, it's like the sunny path or the dark path. It will be, sitting with the darkness and working through the darkness is how you get to the light. And so I think, if women have brought up things to you, looking for patterns of things that women have brought to you, or even other men, just like doing an inventory of your life, I think is something we should all be doing frequently, would be a good place to start.
I agree completely. I know, and this is me, being a meditator for a long time and that sort of thing. Like I get to really know when I take an action, how it makes me feel, action that is like throwing a woman under a bus or hurting another person. Like I feel that, you know what I mean? It's not like I do those things often or very, but like when I hurt somebody, or I know that there's some sort of like, oh, it gets me this feeling of like, oh, wow, like that just doesn't feel right. I maybe not know the words for it. What, alexithymia, is that the word that you're talking about? Having the ability to, understand your emotions. It's that word's in your book. That's a new word for me and John. But just like, and that's is that what alexithymia?
I'm now won't be able to, but axillomethia, I think. Oh, now I'm gonna
that's right. I think you got
axillomethia. I should know it. I haven't read my book in a while.
It's all good, but I think that's what John and I are here to do. That's why your last chapter in the book, Liz, is mindfulness. Is mindfulness masculinity, and and that's what it really takes. It takes what you talk about, journaling and free writing and understanding, like, we call in the work that I do with Will Not Fear, is like minding the gap. It's like, what is where you want to be? How do you get there? Right. And what's the work it takes to bridge that gap and get into this place of a more holistic, emotional masculinity, that we're just aware of how we are, and really just like, what are the actions we're taking and what are the feelings they're producing. Even reverse engineering that, instead of coming from this place of like, of the feeling of aggression and putting on this man armor. It's like, what if I'm just more vulnerable, more open, more authentic? What are the feelings they're going to bring in, and how are they going to make me feel when I take the actions based on being a holistic masculinity or holistic man? So,
and visualization can be a really good partner to that, right? Like it could be a photo, right, of like you in that state where you're like, whatever that means to you, anger or rage or violence or sadness, and then finding a photo or an image, right, of like, this is where I want to be. This is the person I want to be, and even accessing that you have been that person or you have had that behavior, right? And really visualizing that can actually be extremely profound, even with very difficult trauma for people. So that can be a helpful exercise too, in tangent with what you're offering.
Hey Liz, I want to jump in and I think just I want to be respectful of your time too, but and we'll wrap it up. But I one thing is, we got a ton of comments in the live feed. I think we're not going to go through them all, but you know, for those who commented, please pick up Liz's book. She answers a lot of the questions that were asked. I mean,
it's in paperback. It's in paperback.
Fauci recommends. Fauci recommends.
Oh, did he?
I love it. I love it. But I wanted to bring up, you know, we talked about the authentic experience, the authentic life, and Will and I talk about that authentic human experience and truly knowing who you are. You talked about visions, visualization, having a picture, but I want to read one of your amuse-bouches, or a part of it, where you talk about, I think it's Victor Pineda, the guy in a wheelchair, but he's still the alpha male in a room, is what it says. And he says in this chapter that masculinity is anything you want it to be. The problem is when you think that it is prescriptive. We need to be able to have space to find our most authentic selves by being aware of things that we might be carrying. The strongest men are the ones that also understand their weaknesses. If you're the captain of a rugby team, if you know your team has vulnerability or weakness, you are a much better captain by recognizing that than you are by ignoring it. You're a better man by knowing your weaknesses rather than ignoring them. Let the world see all of you. I thought that was super powerful. And if you read nothing else in the book, that amuse-bouche like hit me like a ton of bricks. I was like, okay, masculinity is not, you can't look it up and see it in the dictionary and say, this is the definition, this is what I need to live. You can define masculinity yourself. So that I think is probably
probably wrap it up, John.
Good way to wrap it up. Yeah.
Anything to close, Liz? I mean, big thanks to you, of course, and we'd love to have you back maybe and later on. I would love to just to kind of like, because this is a growing conversation, and it's like our pod. I mean, I think what's the reason our show that John and I are doing, Men Talking Mindfulness, is becoming so popular because it's, I think we there is a need for men to transform and to become more of that holistic masculinity and actually have an arsenal of emotions that are at the disposal in order to create more success in every aspect of their life. So anything, Liz, before we close?
I love it. I'm sending everyone your way. I think we need, we really need people who are doing this work and who are welcoming men into this work. And I can't think of two better people to really do that. And so I'm very, very appreciative because these are words, these are recommendations, and I'm sort of, I wrote this so that men would take this and create their own circles, their own conversations, their own support groups. And that's what you are doing. So I'm very, very, very appreciative of the both of you, and Liz. You being honest about the uncomfortable feelings and the discomfort and the challenges like that. We just need so much more of that. Like, we can't expect people to come in here all fully formed, all fully, I'm still learning, I make mistakes, and let's all make mistakes together.
yeah, exactly. But support each other in the ability to make mistakes and pick each other up. You know what I mean? So, and we're already seeing feminine, we had a female referee on the Super Bowl yesterday. Someone mentioned, it's like, boom, you know what I mean? So the paradigm is changing in a great way. So I think that's, we don't have any time to close, John. Well, this is how we're closing. Right.
Yeah,
this is our mindfully aware of masculinity, and also how, just everything we talked about today. Liz, I cannot thank you enough. It's great to see you. You're all the way in California, no longer in New York. When you come back to New York,
I'm coming back. I can't stay away from you for this long. I'll be back.
Liz, you're amazing. John, thank you for holding this space.
Absolutely, brother. Thank you, Liz.
Thanks for everyone tuning in. Your questions, comments will be hitting that in the back end on our LinkedIn Live. Thanks for your review. Thanks for subscribing. Thanks for sharing this to your friend. And once again, pick up Liz's book, For the Love of Men. It's now paperback. It came out February 5th, paperback, right? And share this with everybody in your life, because it really has a profound effect on our community that's already forming, my life, John's lives. And thank you, Liz, for bringing this work to us and talking to us today, and just being an incredible human being. So thank you.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Mwah.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thanks for joining Will and Jon on Men Talking Mindfulness. If you enjoyed the show, please like and share it with your friends and family, and please, we would appreciate a review too. Until next time, this has been Men Talking Mindfulness. Thanks for showing up.